I'm Amanda and welcome to another one of my quilt block tutorials. In this video I will be showing you step-by-step instructions on how to make the Bear Paw block. Ta-da! Oh, it's so pretty. Now the Bear Paw block is a very traditional patchwork block, but I think with the right choice of fabrics and prints you can definitely bring it in to the 21st century and it can be passed for a very modern block. The inspiration for this block came from this book. It is called Quilts, Quilts, Quilts. This book would be a great addition to any quilter's library if you are looking for a resource that has lots of traditional quilt blocks that you can ponder and delve into and make. Before I get this tutorial underway, I just want to give you a little piece of advice if you're going to give this block a go. Just take your time putting together every element of this block. This block requires you to be quite precise with your cutting and your sewing, just like any other block, but because this one's got lots of little points and parts where seams need to be nested together, just taking your time, putting everything together, pressing it really well is just going to make the block look really, really lovely and swish at the end. So all the details you will need to make this block are down in the description box below. There is also more information on my blog. There will be a link to that blog post down there as well. Go check it out and enjoy making the block. You'll find all of the measurements and cutting instructions in the description box below. To begin, take the 8 2.5 inch pink squares and with a lead pencil and ruler, mark a line down the middle of each one. Next, evenly pair up each of the pink squares with the grey 2.5 inch squares, placing a pin in the middle to secure them together. Once all of the squares are paired together, take them to the sewing machine. Place the machine foot to the left of the pencil line and sew a 1/4 inch seam. Slowly chain stitch the next squares through, taking the pins out as you go. Once you chain stitched all of the squares together, remove them from the machine and turn them around. Sew a 1/4 inch seam along the other side of the pencil line until you've reached the end. Snip the joining threads and then place a ruler along the pencil line and cut the squares in half. Once they've all been cut, you should have 16 half square triangle units. Take these units to the ironing board and with a hot steamy iron, set the seam. Then carefully press the unit open, ensuring that the seam at the back is pressed to the darker side of fabric. Next, assemble together all of the cut pieces to help place the half square triangles in their correct positions. Start with the centre square, then the 4 big pink squares, each of the grey sashing strips, then the half square triangles, and finally the 4 grey corner squares. For a full picture of how the block comes together, there is a link below to my blog where you can print it out and then use it for your own reference. Starting on one side, flip over a half square triangle onto another. Square them up and pin them together. Place the pair to one side and do the same to the next pair. Continue to pair up all of the half square triangles until you have 8 ready to go to the sewing machine. Carefully sew a 1/4 inch seam along the pinned edge, chain stitching the next pair through until you've completed them all. Snip the joining threads and then cautiously press the seams of each unit to the darker side of fabric. Then place the half square triangle pairs back in their correct positions. Starting at one corner, flip one of the 2 1/8 inch grey corner squares onto one of the half square triangle pairs. Square it up and then pin them together. Do the same with the other 3 corner squares. Sew a 1/4 inch seam along the pinned edge. Again, chain stitching the next unit through until you've completed them all. After pressing the seams to the darker side, place the units back into their correct positions. Remove all of the sashing strips and the centre square and place them to one side. Flip the half square triangle pair without the corner square onto the 3 3/4 inch pink square. Square it up and pin them together. Do the same with the other 3 units. Take the 4 pinned units to the sewing machine and sew a 1/4 inch seam along the pinned edges. Snip the joining threads, lay the sewn unit upside down, set the seam and press it inwards towards the large pink square. Give the top of the unit a press as well. Again, lay the units back into their original positions, ready to sew on the half square triangle trios. Flip the trio onto the other side of the previous unit. Square it up, ensuring the corner square seam nests with the seam edge of the large pink square, and then pin them in place. Repeat the same step with the other 3 units. Carefully sew a 1/4 inch seam along the pinned edges, ensuring that all of the seams are flat as you sew over them. Set the seams and again press it inwards towards the large pink square. Press the top of the unit as well. Lay the completed units back into their correct positions. Place the center square and 2 sashing strips to one side. Separate 2 of the paw units to one side. Flip one of the sashing strips onto the opposite unit, square it up and pin it in place. Repeat the same step with the other sashing strip and paw unit. Once you've sewn a 1/4 inch seam, open them up and flip the other corresponding paw unit on top. Square the components up and pin them in place. Repeat the same step with the other units. Next, sew a 1/4 inch seam along each of the pinned edges. Slowly press the seams inwards towards the sashing strips. Press the top of the units as well. Pin the center square along the shorter side of one of the 2 other sashing strips. Sew a 1/4 inch seam along this edge and remove it from the machine. Open it out and pin the other sashing strip to the other side of the center square and sew it in place. Open the sewn sashing strip out and press the seams outwards towards the darker fabric. Next, lay out all 3 sewn pieces ready to assemble them together. Separate the top row from the others. Flip the center sashing onto the bottom row. Patiently nest the middle seams and pin them in place. Pin along the rest of this edge as well. At the sewing machine, sew a 1/4 inch seam along the pinned edge, ensuring all of the seams are flat before you sew over them. Open the sashing row out and flip the top row onto it. Like before, nest the middle seams together and pin them in place. Pin along the rest of the edge as well. Sew a 1/4 inch seam along this edge just like before. Take the block to the ironing board and carefully press the seams inwards towards the sashing strips. Give the top of the block a good press as well. And lastly, neaten the edges of the block with a ruler and blade. So there we have it, that is how you make the Bear Paw block. I am absolutely in love with this block. It is actually one of my favourite traditional blocks to make. I personally quite like making it with 2 contrasting prints. That way the actual paw type of block really stands out and it just makes it look really, really effective. If you have any questions or comments on this block or have any other suggestions of other tutorials you would like me to make, write me a little comment and I will definitely reply back to you. And one last thing before I go, subscribe to my channel if you would like to see more of the things that I do here. I have lots more tutorials and crafty ideas in the planning, so stick around for those. Thank you so much for watching and I hope to see you another time very, very soon. Bye! In this video I will be showing you step-by-step instructions of how to make the Bear Paw block. This is called quilts.